Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm your host, Park Howell, and I'm gosh darn glad you're here with us today. I'm also author of the new book, Brand Bewitchery. You know what retired Washington State University history professor Leroy Ashby said about my new book? Oh, and by the way, Leroy is the author of the amazing book called With Amusement for All, A History of American Pop Culture Since 1830. Check it out. It's a fantastic read. Leroy said about Brand Bewitchery, this is a practical guide to how the art of storytelling can distinguish and elevate a product or service's brand. Park includes useful case studies, draws creatively from sources ranging from mythologist Joseph Campbell to the Wizard of Oz, and engages in a kind of conversation with the reader. The result is a useful, imaginative book that is both well-written and thoughtful. And thank you, Mr. Ashby, for your thoughts on Brand Bewitchery. It's so appreciated because you are a legend in the history of pop culture and its impact on society. So what do you say, folks? You can grab a copy of his book and mine now on Amazon or Apple Books. I thought Leroy's Amazon review was particularly timely for today's show because we explore how TV, the film industry, and pop culture has been entertaining while educating us on health and social issues since, 1830. But today, who can you trust on the airwaves? We have so-called fake news. Our lack of leadership with COVID-19 has ginned up every kind of conspiracy theory. Russians are infiltrating our elections with enormously effective misinformation campaigns. The, quote, it must be true because I read it on the web fallacy that we all deal with. So who can you turn to? Who can you believe? Today's guest is Kate Langrall Folb. She is the director of Hollywood Health and Society, and she'll share stories from her 20 years in the industry educating screenwriters on health and social issues so that they are accurately portrayed in the storylines of some of your favorite TV shows, like Madam Secretary, Grey's Anatomy, General Hospital, Law and Order, among countless others. But getting mass media to embrace the truth about divisive yet important issues has not always been easy for Kate.
So eventually there was a memo that was floated around Viacom to everybody saying, if a woman named Kate Folb calls you or reaches out to you, do not meet with her because she's going to ask you to put condoms in your shows and do condom PSAs. And I, at the one point, I was on my way to do a PSA with a certain show that I won't name. And they called me before I left my office and said, don't come, because we got suits down here saying if she shows up, we're shutting this whole thing down.
Hollywood Health and Society is the flagship program at the University of Southern California's Annenberg School Norman Lear Center. Kate leads a team of public health and media professionals to connect entertainment content creators with experts in health, medicine, science, safety, and security to ensure accuracy in their depictions. Her team also conducts research on the impact of TV storylines on viewers' knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors. Today, we'll explore how Kate and her team inform the writers of the entertainment you love to help them provide educational content you can trust. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It was so much fun because I was participating in one of Randy Olson's virtual ABT courses. And I can't remember if you were on the National Park Service one or the one before that. We've been doing so many of them during the days of COVID. But I heard your presentation about Hollywood Health and Society and the great work you all are doing to educate writers of TV shows on social issues, health-related issues, so that they are accurate. And I just thought, boy, she would be awesome for the Business of Story. So thank you for accepting my invite to come on today.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about Hollywood Health and Society and what it is you all do there?
So Hollywood Health and Society is a program of the University of Southern California Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism's Norman Lear Center. So it's a mouthful, and there will be a quiz at the end of this. We're part of the Norman Lear Center, which is, again, part of the Annenberg School. Its mission is to study and shape the impact that media have on audiences. But within the Lear Center, my project, Hollywood Health and Society, looks at how entertainment media affects audiences in the areas around health, science, medicine, personal safety, social safety and security, pro-social issues, and on down the line. So 20 years ago, we were founded through a generous gift from Norman Lear, but then also through a cooperative agreement grant from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So at that time, there was another pandemic happening, HIV/AIDS, and the CDC was really getting inundated with calls from the entertainment industry who were interested in writing about it. But the CDC doesn't understand Hollywood or storytelling or any of that. And so they thought it would be really great to have an arm of theirs, so to speak, in Hollywood that understands storytelling, that knows these writers and can help liaise between CDC and the entertainment industry. So that's how we were established. And it's grown, of course, since then. We have other funding partners beyond CDC at this point. We do many other issues beyond. At that time, it was really health, specifically around health and medicine. Now we do everything from national security to climate change to immigration and other sorts of pro-social issues, racism, just kind of everything across the board. And because we've been around so long, writers know us and they know whether or not it's a topic they think we can help them with. They usually start with us anyway. So they may reach out and say, I'm not sure if this is in your wheelhouse, but maybe you can help me. And usually we can. And we go from there. So the project was established really to, connect the medical and health and scientific communities with the entertainment industry to ensure accuracy around those depictions. And if you think back, I can remember those days. I don't know if you do, or how many of your listeners do, but there was a lot of misinformation being spread around HIV/AIDS in the beginning of that pandemic, as similar to now with COVID-19. And so part of our mission was really to ensure accuracy around the stories that the entertainment industry planned to tell around HIV/AIDS and, of course, then other health topics, because we know that audiences actually learn from what they see on their favorite TV show, and they pay a little bit more attention to their favorite character than they do the news or certainly commercials and public service announcements. So it was very important that the storytellers get it right.
So you're really educating through entertainment, pop culture.
Exactly.
And what made me think of it is the day I heard you speak with Randy's group, the day just before that, I had just recorded Peter Horton from 30-something fame and St. Elsewhere, Grey's Anatomy, and now New Amsterdam. And he talked a lot about the shows they write, direct, and produce, the optimism in them, and how they're always trying to take on a bit of a social issue to help explain it. So it was like my universe had come together, because in 5 years I had never explored this in media, and then there you were. So your job functionally then for the overall organization is to simply make sure that the writers get it right and are accurate. You don't have any involvement in the actual storyline or whatever. You're just there to make sure that they are factually correct in the stories they're telling.
Yes. Well, our mission really is to inform and inspire accurate storytelling. So, yes, we don't go in and try to control what they want to write about, but rather we're a resource, and mind you, a free resource to them to help them research the topics that they have already chosen to write about, connect them with experts if they want to talk through their storyline or their script or whatever, or have an expert vet their script for the appropriate language and so forth. But also to inspire and to come to them and say, you guys have never written about this topic, or here's a whole new development in the science world that, we think would be really interesting for you and your show. And we don't go any further than that in terms of pitching anything, but we say, this might be of interest to you.
Do you have an example of that, of recently, maybe one of the shows picked up on from one of your prompts?
Sure. So there's a lot of talk, and you've probably read about and heard about the development of AI, artificial intelligence. And the fact that, we're getting robots that can actually do therapy sessions with people and all kinds of different uses for AI. I had recently been invited to attend a conference in Berlin hosted by a group called the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots.
That's a cool name, actually.
Yeah, it is. It's very cool, kind of retro. But it was a conference and they were meeting in Berlin, and they were on their way to Geneva to testify at the UN because they were trying to get some bans in place about AI and the use of AI, much like they were able to ban chemical weapons and landmines and things like that. So a lot of the people that were at this conference were former Google employees and people from other tech organizations that felt that things were not completely on the up and up and what was going on, as well as people who had succeeded in getting other kinds of weapons banned, like the woman who got landmines banned, who won a Nobel Peace Prize for it. So it was this really interesting group of people. And I'm kind of like, why am I here? I watch TV for a living. Like, I don't know. But I did a presentation to them about some of the shows that we had worked with on nuclear weapons and some other issues that were sort of similar to national security and these topics. But when I got back, I'd learned so much there about AI that I immediately reached out to the show Madam Secretary and said, you guys, I just went to this crazy conference. I met all these crazy smart people, that are doing this work that like we don't know about this kind of thing that goes on. And I think, you might be really interested in that. So of course we connected them up with some experts, some of the folks that were at that Berlin event, and they did an episode called Killer Robots.
So they even picked up the campaign name for the show title,
huh? They totally did. Yeah, they totally did. Because we have such an intimate relationship with the writers, because we work with them so often, they trust me they know I'm not going to be pushy about it, that I'm just in absolute best interest. This might be something that interests you. If not, no problem. I can do that with certain shows. There are other shows, if they're new or a new showrunner that doesn't know us, we're not quite as
not quite as embedded yet.
Huh? Yes, not quite. But that's a great example of just how they were like, oh my God, that's really cool. We're going to do an episode. And they did.
Well, why I'm fascinated about having you here is my whole life I've spent 35 years in the branding world, and really over the last 20 years, very much focused on purpose-driven branding and how to communicate using story, and the fact that brands have a real opportunity to do sort of the same thing that you are doing, and that they have their own audiences. Now, they may not be to the size of a St. Elsewhere or a, Madam Secretary, but they have ardent followers. And so while brands are communicating about their product or service, they can also be using their platform for good and sharing authentic, truthful information with the world, because brands are in the entertainment business too. Yeah, their end goal is to sell, but isn't that really the end goal of every TV show? To get as many viewers as possible so that they can sell advertising on it. So my question to you, can you take us to your backstory a little bit, because you have such an interesting background between education, health and human services, and entertainment that I think our listeners could really benefit about your evolution. How did you find yourself here?
I'm going to go back to early childhood. I grew up in the 60s and the 70s. I was kind of a TV generation kid. A latchkey kid as well. Walked home from elementary school, let myself in, had a couple of hours to myself until mom got home from work. What did I do? I will pretty much watch TV, and back then, you were almost encouraged to watch TV. It was such a new technology and, so much interesting things.
It was a great babysitter. You can't get in too much trouble watching TV.
That's right. So, I watched a lot of TV, and I've loved it ever since. I've always been more of a TV person even than a movie person, although I love a feature film. But There's just something about the medium that's so compelling in that, it does come into your living room. Characters do almost become your friends in some way. I can remember noticing, I think I was in probably like fifth grade or something when Laugh-In first came out. Every day after whatever night that show aired, all the kids at school were talking about, did you see? Did you see? Of course, it was much more collective experience back then. There were only 3 networks and you just watched whatever they offered.
And we should probably let people know what Laugh-In was. I mean,
yeah,
it was like this crazy, wacky variety show, sort of psychedelic 60s of the time. Goldie Hawn was a big star on it.
One of the writers was Lorne Michaels, who then went on to create Saturday Night Live.
I did not know that.
He started on Laugh-In. So it was kind of the Saturday Night Live of the 60s. But yeah, psychedelic, and a lot of comedians got their start there. So it was sort of the forerunner to a Saturday Night Live. Very hip, very edgy for the time. So even at a very young age, I was sort of fascinated with the medium and kept thinking to myself, I want to do that. I want to know how they do that. And this is really powerful stuff. And then around the same time, Sesame Street was first introduced. I was probably 5th or 6th grade at that time, maybe 4th grade, something. I was older, elementary age. But still, we were all, interested and watched it. And I think they even showed it to us at school because it was sort of this new groovy educational thing. And that's when it really hit me like, I want to do that. Like, that's entertaining. It's funny. It's creative, but it's also teaching me something, or it's also offering a service to its viewership. I guess I figured out from a pretty young age too, just watching reruns of Gilligan's Island were really just designed to sell me Doritos, or to sell my mom soap or whatever. And
Captain Crunch and Lucky Charms.
Exactly. So I think, that was when it really hit me like, that's something I want to learn more about. And I just want to investigate. So then from then on, I mean, pretty much my whole rest of my childhood, high school, and even into college was sort of this covert effort to get to Hollywood and get into television. And of course, even though television was definitely the ultimate babysitter in my parents' generation, it was not a career. My father was a doctor, so that was a career. You were a doctor, you were a lawyer, you didn't go into TV.
That was not a thing.
I had to be sort of understated about what my ultimate goals were, and happily ended up getting a scholarship to come to USC for graduate school. And that was my reason for getting to LA.
And you grew up in Indiana, right? So you had this Midwest, work ethic and mentality, and get a real job, Kate. How did you talk your folks into letting you go out to crazy Hollyweird?
Well, I did very well in undergraduate school. I went to the University of Denver, and I also studied in Europe. My grades were great, and I got a free ride to come to USC to do graduate work in Spanish language and literature and to teach. I was also brought out as a TA to teach, all the kids who had a language requirement, the freshmen. And so there was nothing my family could really say, because it was like, they're going to pay me to go to grad school. So, and guess what? It's in LA.
So you had this love for TV, but obviously language arts and Spanish and working it. Yeah. Were you using that as a vehicle to get into TV, or were you thinking you were actually going to use this degree?
I happen to have a knack for languages. So I learned Spanish from a very young age. I just happened to have a teacher who taught us Spanish in elementary school. And I carried on with that in junior high and high school and did very well in that. And it's also been something I'm interested in. I'm definitely interested in storytelling and language. And I got a great scholarship to the University of Denver based on my foreign language expertise, and took that. I was just incrementally working my way to the West Coast. Then once I got to LA, I promptly went after a job in television, started at the very bottom. I got a job as a receptionist at Don Kirshner's rock concert, which was a television show. I'm just giving away my age because this was a show that was before MTV even existed. And it was similar to what MTV was later designed to do, which was we would go out and shoot rock bands in concert and then put it on late night television. We also had interviews and, all kinds of other things. So this guy, Don Kirshner, was sort of the grandfather of music on television. He also wrote the theme song for Bewitched and all kinds of those 60s TV shows. But this was his sort of signature show. I got a job as a receptionist. And I used to stew because, of course, I had more education than the producers of the show. And there's all kinds of Me Too things I could talk about, but that's a whole other podcast. But anyway, started at the bottom as a receptionist, worked my way up to a production assistant, to an assistant director, worked in associate producer roles.
It's the Hollywood story then.
Yeah,
starting
definitely.
At the bottom and just practicing. And how long did that take you to move from that receptionist role up into producing and directing?
I would say about 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I was doing not the kind of shows that I wanted to be doing. I was doing whatever came my way. And I happened to fall into this sort of music, world and rock and roll on TV and musical variety. I ended up working on like the American Music Awards and, anything that sort of involved music on television, whether it was rock and roll or otherwise. I worked on a country music show and a Lou Rawls show and some really wild stories. And it was great being young and doing that. And then I went to work for a company called Alive Enterprises, which was a artist management company as well as a film production company. We managed people like Alice Cooper and Teddy Pendergrass, Blondie, on some of these 80s bands, Squeeze, which was a lot of fun also. But then I was able to sort of dip my toe into the film production side of it as well.
So you were getting great production experience, but not real storytelling experience.
Exactly.
So you were cutting your teeth on how do you actually put this together and make a solid production that people would watch. So you spent your first decade doing that, it sounds like.
And making a lot of connections and developing relationships with people in the entertainment industry. So then I got married, took a couple of years off to have a couple babies, and realized I cannot go back and just make meaningless television. I just can't, that's not what I set out to do ever. And now that I've had a minute to stop and think about, how I want to re-enter the workplace, I just can't do that. And an opportunity came along for me to go to work for a foundation that was started by the actor Paul Newman, who, for your young viewers, was an iconic movie star who only passed away a few years ago, was really, the Tom Cruise of his era, was a huge movie star. And he had started this group in response to the death of his son from a drug overdose. And the Scott Newman Foundation, later called the Scott Newman Center, was devoted to addressing how the entertainment industry was depicting drug use. And at that time, there were Cheech and Chong movies and movies about how funny it was to be the stoner. Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
That's what I was just going to say.
All of that, which, it's great entertainment, but it doesn't tell the whole story. And it didn't address sort of the realities of drug use. And of course, back then, that was a different drug war than we're in now, but, similar circumstances. And so Mr. Newman really wanted to leverage his entertainment industry connections to ask the industry to really take another look at what stories they're telling around addiction and drug and alcohol use. And so I went to work for that organization. And of course, he had a lot more entertainment connections than I did, but he's a movie guy and I had been in TV. And so I was able to sort of leverage my television connections as well to do kind of what we do now at Hollywood Health and Society, but with a more narrow focus.
That was your first step into it then. And how was Paul Newman to work with?
Oh, a dream come true. The man is just dreamy all the way around. He wasn't there on a daily basis, of course. Aside from Norm and Lear, and I'm so grateful I've had to work with the two of them. Paul Newman is probably the most philanthropic person I've ever met in my life. The person who cared the most about the world in which he lived, cared about children, cared about people who were disadvantaged. I mean, he started his whole Newman's Own food company basically to take no profits and to give all of those profits away to pro-social organizations. So he was amazing.
And he knew the power of his celebrity.
Absolutely. He was kind of a quiet, shy guy. He wasn't really out there flamboyant like some of the big movie stars. He was a different kind of it was a different era. But anyway, yeah, so I was very lucky to work with the Scott Newman Center on that. And then a few years later, Mr. Newman decided to take most of his philanthropy, aside from Newman's Own, to his camps, which he started these hole-in-the-wall gang camps, which are now all over the world, that take kids who couldn't normally go to a regular summer camp because of a disability or an illness or something. He has these specialized camps to give them that camp experience. And so he wanted to sort of shift into that direction. And that at the same time was about the time that the HIV/AIDS pandemic was ramping up and taking its toll on Hollywood big time.
So what year was this roughly?
So that was probably 91, 92-ish, something like that.
Early 1990s. Mm-hmm.
I went to work for another organization, a group that's based in Washington, D.C., called Advocates for Youth. It's still around, and they are an international nonprofit that deals with adolescent reproductive health and sexuality. They had established a media project in Hollywood prior to the AIDS crisis to deal with storytelling around teen pregnancy and pregnancy prevention and STDs and that kind of a thing. So it was kind of a small operation. And then with the HIV/AIDS crisis, they really wanted to do a full court press with the entertainment industry to quell some of the misinformation that was already out there, much like with COVID-19 now. There was lots of crazy talk about, this is a plot to destroy people of color, or if you kiss somebody, you're going to get it, all kinds of things. And the Hollywood community was being affected by the disease as well. And so I went to work for Advocates for Youth to really do a serious outreach to the entertainment industry on everything to do with HIV/AIDS. And then beyond that, condom normalization and safe sex. I mean, this is back in the day where they wouldn't even say the word condom on a radio show, much less talk about it on TV or show them. I feel a little gratified because I drive around LA now and they're like giant billboards of inflated condoms, talking about protect yourself and your partner or whatever, like it's just no big deal. But back then it was really taboo.
You also did something called the Shine Awards,
right,
which, given the time where people weren't talking about condoms and healthy sexual, behavior and whatever, you actually have an annual awards program you directed. What was that about?
Well, so the Shine Awards, stood for Sexual Health in Entertainment. And it was our little small version of the Emmys. It was kind of the carrot. It was an offering of incentive to TV writers to do storylines around these issues. And then, you'll win an award and you'll get a lot of publicity and celebrities will come and red carpet and all of that.
Did you get pushback on that at all?
Not so much on the awards, but we got a lot of pushback on reaching out to the shows to ask them to write about these issues. I had been attempting to do some work with Viacom around PSAs for safe sex and for condoms. And I had gone to Europe and studied how they did it in Europe because Europe had done a great job of condom normalization. Their HIV rates were really low. Their teen pregnancy rates were really low. Their abortion rates were really low because they're just very open about talking about sex and condoms and safe sex and all the rest of it. I did all this research in Europe and came back and did a presentation to all the network and studio heads. I brought them all together at the Television Academy, showed them videos, and said, "You guys, HIV is rampant in this country, and here's a way that you can help." Out of all the networks that were in that meeting, one network came to me and said, "Let's do this." And they were under Viacom. It was a network called the UPN network, which is now part of the CW network. They merged. But the president of UPN came to me and said, "Let's do this." And we developed some PSAs aimed at their target audiences, and they were very successful. And so I went around to the other networks and said, "Look what those guys did," and just went directly to shows and said, "Can you get your cast at the end of a shooting day? Can you get your cast to just say how important it is to use a condom or whatever?" So eventually there was a memo that was floated around Viacom to everybody saying, if a woman named Kate Folb calls you or reaches out to you, do not meet with her because she's going to ask you to put condoms in your shows and do condom PSAs. And I at the one point I was on my way to do a PSA with a certain show that I won't name, and they called me before I left my office and said, "Don't come, because we got suits down here saying if she shows up, we're shutting this whole thing down." So it was really interesting, like how sort of almost militant they were about it. Like I was some spy, or I wear it as a badge
you
of
were
honor.
worse. You were worse than that, because
Yeah.
that Puritan mindset
Right?
you were attacking. Now, what did mom and dad have to say about this? You had a dad who's a doctor. You had mom who was in the health care world as well, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was a hospital administrator.
Hospital
Yeah.
administrator, and you're running around selling condoms or selling TV shows to put condoms on.
It's interesting. I don't know that I ever had a conversation much with my mom about it. She would have been more horrified. My father would have been okay because he was a doctor and he got it. And I actually even asked him, "Can I call you to consult with a show if need be?" And he was like, "Totally, I'd love to do that." But my mom probably was not as thrilled. She was even more sort of hesitant about me even choosing this career. But, I was making a living, and my kids were healthy, and, we had a nice family life. And so I guess she couldn't complain. So I never really heard much from her on that.
So what did you do after that? You started a consultancy then of connecting celebrities with these sort of cause messages?
Yeah. So around 2001, I guess, I started my own agency, which was just a consultant firm. And we pretty much did the same thing. I mean, I had two major clients, but also others where I worked with nonprofits to produce PSAs for them, to produce events like press conferences, a lot of activities in Washington, bringing celebrities to Washington to participate in press events, working with shows to see if they would do a storyline on a particular topic. So I did that for about 10 years. And around that time, 2001, is when Hollywood Health and Society was first established. When they first were sort of looking at creating Hollywood Health and Society, they came and met, CDC folks came and met with a lot of the other groups that were in Hollywood doing this kind of work. So they met with me, there was a group that was here then, although I don't think they exist anymore, but was very active about violence on television at the time, a group called Mediascope. And of course, the addiction efforts and so forth. And so I actually met with the people who were getting ready to establish Hollywood Health and Society. And I remember thinking, I'm going to end up working there one day because I have to. It's just, this is what I do. So it's funny that I've now come full circle.
And so you've been there ever since 2012.
Yep.
And what do you say when people watch anything on TV, and especially the conservatives, and say, "Oh, that's just Hollywood liberal bias. You can't believe it. They are, it's propaganda, and be careful what you watch and listen to," when your very job is to fight against that and get, TV producers, directors, and writers to produce and present only the facts?
We have had, a handful of instances where political individuals have accused our work or the CDC, because they have been a primary funder all this time, of using Hollywood to promote an agenda. I wasn't around when Hollywood Health and Society was doing because they were also doing sexual health and HIV stuff when they first came. When Obamacare was first made into law, we were given a grant not by CDC, but by a separate foundation to work with the entertainment industry to just make sure that they knew the facts about Obamacare. Because again, there was misinformation out there, death panels and, all kinds of nonsense. And it was already a law. And so our grant was just to inform writers about the realities of the law. But we were accused by some in Washington and elsewhere that we were promoting Obama's agenda, that we were using these funds to move forward his agenda. It comes up every now and then. It just kind of fizzles away because it's so not true. My door is open. You can come look at my records of all my consultants, all my inquiries. We take notes on every time we work with a show. We're not doing anything other than creating the connection. And we're connecting them with experts in these fields. Granted, we can't control the outcome of the storytelling because a writer may have a point of view that they want to share and they're going to go in that direction. We can't control that. But if we give them the accurate information, usually the outcome is going to be pretty accurate.
Are you ever there watching TV and you see something that is inaccurate, shown on a show?
I mean, don't we all? I mean, that's the problem too. And I tell this to my funders as well as anytime I do an interview, because even if a writer doesn't really care about imparting accurate health information, they do care about how many eyeballs are watching their show. And from watching something, sometime you've seen something that didn't seem right. And you may have disengaged. You may have changed the channel. You may have decided you don't like this show anymore because it's hokey. They don't want that. They want your eyeballs. So it behooves them to be as accurate as possible, even if they don't care about helping the general public. Our mission is, of course, to get this information out there because we know through our research that it does help the general public, that people do learn from what they see in their favorite shows.
How many experts do you have in your stable, across the board in all the different issues you deal with in order to impart accurate information to writers?
Oh, we have a couple thousand in our database for sure. We have all of the CDC. They're available when they're not fighting pandemics. We have lots of other experts outside of CDC. And over 20 years, we've just accrued experts through our own research, our own experiences, going to conferences, et cetera, et cetera. We've just accrued lots of other experts around every topic from, again, health and medicine to nuclear weapons, non-proliferation to aging and caregiving to immigration and everything in between. And they love it. I mean, our work is pro bono. We don't take a fee. We don't take a credit. We're partnered with the Writers Guilds and the Producers Guild and the Television Academy. So the entertainment industry sees us as one of their support systems, their services that are available to them. The experts that join our database kind of like doing it. I mean, I have working brain surgeons that love to do a call with Grey's Anatomy. It's something totally different from what they do day to day. And then we have enough in our database that we're never going to monopolize anybody's time too much. We want to be respectful that they are working professionals and they are doing this pro bono.
I've got a friend out here in Arizona who is a prosthetics expert, and they build prosthetics and do, really amazing work. And he has been called out to Hollywood to be in emergency room shots just to make sure that they're doing it right and so forth. So I'll have to ask you, but would that be the kind of expert too that you would make available to a production team?
Yeah, absolutely. We have done some of that. There's a hospital down in San Antonio, Texas. It's affiliated with the military, I think, and it deals with military personnel who have lost a limb or whatever and helping them to sort of rehabilitate, get used to their prostheses. And one of the docs down there is fantastic. And we've used him on a number of occasions, and he is an amazing storyteller himself. Usually when he consults, we're all in tears by the end of whatever story he's telling us about whatever patient he's just been working with. But yeah, those are the kinds of folks that if they like doing it and they don't mind doing it for free, we always, the more the merrier for us, because
Well, it's
again,
always kind of fun to be, intertwined with Hollywood and get, see how these productions come together. I always have found it fascinating. So I imagine a lot of these experts do as well. And they probably feel like they're giving back because they have a very large stage in which to impart their information.
One of the executive producers of Grey's Anatomy is an MD herself. Actually, they have 3 MDs on their writing staff. Most of the medical shows have at least one MD on their writing staff, but of course, they can't know everything. But this woman, who's a executive producer, tells the story of she was an ER doc, and she said, on a really busy day in the ER, I might reach 50 people, between the patients and a couple of family members, with important health and medical information. On an episode of Grey's Anatomy, I reach 8 million people in one episode. And then that doesn't even count how many people watch the reruns or DVR it for later. And that's just in the US. And Grey's Anatomy is in 200 television markets around the world. It's been translated into 60 languages. I mean, it's just everywhere. So she says, I'm still practicing medicine, really, in a way, and I'm reaching a much bigger audience.
Isn't that cool? Is there a show or a social cause that you all helped inform the writing team on that you're particularly proud of how it was presented, or it really helped move the needle after an episode was played or maybe a series was played that you can think of?
There's lots. I have tons of anecdotal information, and I have also empirical data that we've collected. We often do impact studies when we have the funding and we have the storyline on how an episode or a storyline impacts audiences' knowledge, attitudes, and even behaviors around their health, depending on what the topic is. Many years ago now, we did a study with the show 90210. It was when the breast cancer gene was discovered, and then later you were able to test for it and take some prophylactic measures to prevent the development of breast cancer. And it was a very new concept for the general public. And this show wanted to do a storyline on the breast cancer gene, the BRCA gene. And we worked with them on the whole storyline. CDC experts came in and talked to the writers. It ended up being a 9-episode storyline, everything from this young woman who's getting ready to go to college. She goes in for her exam. Her doctor says you should get tested because your mother died of breast cancer and your aunt died of breast cancer, whatever. So she gets tested. And of course, she has the gene. Now she has some decisions to make. So it was this whole story arc of this one character that spanned 9 episodes. And so we did an impact study surveying audiences before that storyline began on their knowledge and attitudes around breast cancer and the breast cancer gene and so forth. And then after the storyline aired, and gauged the change in their knowledge. We couldn't really track their behaviors, but we tracked their behavioral intentions. So they were more inclined to call their doctor and see if they were a candidate to get the test for the breast cancer gene, which there's certain criteria you have to meet to actually be somebody who would be a candidate. So they investigated that. There were other kinds of activities and actions that they took after watching the episode, as well as their knowledge levels increased significantly. And that's a published, peer-reviewed study that we did. And we do a number of those. We recently did one a couple of years ago with an episode of a show called Royal Pains, which was on the USA Network. And it's kind of a fluffy medical show about a doctor who treats the rich people in the Hamptons, but then, kind of as community service, he also treats people that aren't wealthy. And they came to us because they wanted to do an episode that involved a transgender character. This was about, I think, the first season of Orange is the New Black was on Netflix. They had a transgender character, and it was the first season of the show Transparent that was on, I think, Amazon. So there weren't very many transgender characters on TV, especially broadcast or cable TV. There were the two on streaming shows. And if you were watching them, your attitudes were already pretty much defined. But this show is a very broad reaching show that reached across the political ideology spectrum. It always had a happy ending. It was just a nice show to just watch and feel okay at the end of it. And maybe you learned something. And they wanted to do this storyline with this transgender character. And they came to us about that. And also because there were some medical complications that this young woman was having with regard to her transition and all the rest of it. So we consulted on it, but we thought this is a great episode to do a study on because there are so few transgender characters out there at all. This was at the time when there was an argument in, I think, North Carolina about bathroom use and who could use what bathroom and all of that.
So, Kate, was this like about 2014, 2015?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Roughly? Okay.
Mm-hmm. 2015. Yeah, 2015 was when the episode aired. So anyway, we did the same thing. We surveyed audiences before the episode aired and then after, and we looked at knowledge gains and particularly attitude shifts towards transgender people or policies around transgender people. The findings were really interesting. And this gets to the storytelling piece. Because at the same time that our episode aired and we were doing our study, Caitlyn Jenner came out with her transition.
Bruce Jenner to Caitlyn Jenner.
Correct. And there were news stories about her. There were interviews with her. She was on the cover of Vanity Fair, I think, or one of the big magazines. So we had to account for that in our study as well. But the interesting thing that we found was that people whose ideologies tended to be self-reported, of course, tended to be more conservative around transgender, after just being exposed to our story on Royal Pains, those conservative attitudes softened considerably. If they were only exposed to the Caitlyn Jenner story through the news, those attitudes hardened. They dug in deeper, became more conservative. So, which tells us that the identification with a character, the identification with the story, the emotional identification, the transportation, these are two terms we use in academia, identification and transportation. Identification with a character and also transportation, meaning you're transported into the story. There's some point when you're watching a movie where you're not in the movie theater anymore. You're running through the forest with the characters. That's called transportation. When those two things occur, the information sinks in on a lot deeper and can have a deeper effect. And we found that, identification or transportation with this story lessened the impact that a conservative ideology had upon a person's attitude around transgender. And then, of course, if they were exposed to more than one storyline involving a transgender character, like an Orange is the New Black or Transparent or maybe a movie or something else at that time, their attitudes were even softened to a greater degree. And whereas with straight up news, that was not the case.
With straight up news, would that be bringing you more of logic, rational, what people would believe to be logic and rational data, and just say, here's what's going on, versus a story arc that, as you say, you identify with the character in it, and then you're transported into their world a little bit.
And there's emotion.
Yeah.
There's emotion involved. And yes, and we've even done experiments where we have created our own content, where we created a documentary style little film about cervical cancer. And it's just a doctor talking to, whatever the information is about cervical cancer. We created a little story, a little movie of a family. They're making tamales together. There's multi-generation. But it's a little bit of a story, and the same exact information is being presented, exactly the same information. But one is, very didactic and documentary style, and the other is through story. And we measured the knowledge gains, and people who were exposed to the story, the knowledge gains were much greater, and they retained that knowledge longer. It's the storytelling that's really the key. The identification, the transportation, the emotional connection, the arc, all of that keeps you connected and open to whatever is being presented. When you watch a news story, especially these days, whenever you watch something in the news, your critical thinking is way up there. You're counter arguing every single thing they tell you, but you're not counter arguing with your favorite character on Grey's Anatomy because you're rooting for them. So that's the difference.
Isn't that interesting? So you can sneak in, slip in information, facts, knowledge, and you can see where people would think you might be using that for evil too in propaganda. They can argue either side of that, but the power of story. And it seems to me in talking to you now that you intuitively knew this as that little girl watching Sesame Street. And then through your whole career, was it not really until 2014-15 where you codified this concept of identification and transportation? Or is it something you were always working towards in your work?
There's a whole school of thought, and there are fathers of this area of study, Miguel Sabido and others, who have really sort of coined these terms and really studied it. But I think probably intuitively, I sort of got it, as a kid. I'd much rather watch a story about so and so than watch this boring school movie about how you have to wash your hands or whatever it was. So I think intuitively, yeah, I picked up on that. But and even this school of thought is not that old, really. Probably began in the 70s or 80s. And there are some sort of classic case studies of using entertainment to change behavior, like the seatbelt campaign was one of the first, which came out of Harvard, actually, where they asked all entertainment shows, cop shows, whatever, just anytime you show somebody getting in a car, just show them putting their seatbelt. You don't have to talk about it. You don't have to do anything. Just show them putting on their seatbelt. And lo and behold, now we all put our seatbelts on. There were many, many, many years where people did not wear seatbelts. They thought it was wimpy, or kind of like masks these days, I guess. But
one could argue that leadership out of Washington, D.C., especially the White House, has really been a reality TV show over the last 3.5 years. As you sit and watch this and you hear some of the information coming out that everybody seems to be debunking, and of course they'll say it's fake news, it's the left media versus Fox, versus the Trump. Do you ever sit there and cringe of hearing what is being put out into the world of what is just purely inaccurate, given all of the work you all do to make it as accurate as possible in the shows we watch?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sad right now that government agencies like the CDC are even being discredited in some way. The general public is being told not to believe them. It's very disconcerting. And I don't really know what else to say other than, yeah, I do cringe. I do worry about it. Our work has always been about accuracy. And the reason it's about accuracy is for the public well-being. This is for public health. This is why we do this. Nothing more than that. You can imagine if a TV show misinformed people, well, and we're seeing that, but I mean, imagine, let's just take HIV. Imagine if a TV show said, oh, you can't get it from having unprotected sex. How many people are going to take that information, act upon it, and you're going to exacerbate the situation? I mean, we're seeing that already now with the mask debate and some of these other things. It's disconcerting, but it's also sort of like, if ever we needed somebody advocating for accuracy in media, it's now, And I mean, we always say we're not an advocacy group. We don't advocate for a point of view. If you're writing a story about a topic and you have a certain point of view, we're not going to tell you to change your point of view, but we are going to say, well, here's the truth. This is the accurate information about it. I mean, if you're hell bent on writing something that's not accurate, we can't stop you. Again, it goes back to that, especially around health and things that people have a day-to-day relationship with. They know if it's hinky, they know if it's not true. So it behooves you to be as accurate as possible. The only thing we advocate for is accuracy. And we advocate for it for the benefit of the public. We also think it's a good idea for you, the writer, to be accurate because it'll keep your viewers engaged.
You're not going to take a side. You just side on fact and truth.
Exactly.
Say this.
Exactly.
So you all go. Are you getting a lot of requests around COVID?
Yes, absolutely. Any show that takes place in our world, that's not an animated show or a sci-fi or a historical show that takes place in present day in our world is going to have to address COVID in some way. I mean, they can't, otherwise it's not going to look realistic. How can you watch Grey's Anatomy next season and have them pretend like COVID didn't happen? It's just not going to, so they have to. And yes, we've already done, I think at last count, I've done 10 or 12 inquiries on COVID-19 with everything from children's shows to medical shows to police dramas. So they're all looking at how they're going to address it. The biggest question for them right now is how they're going to go into production. But we've still been working with writers through this whole quarantine time, as the writers are still working on, their storylines. And it's just a matter of when they're going to get back into production, but they will be dealing with it.
I was going to say, do you see production starting anytime soon out there?
Yeah, they're starting. There's a few. The soap operas are back. Animation never went away. Talk shows never went away. The late night talk shows you've seen. Some of the others are coming back either this month or in September. I think most of the fall season is going to be delayed until either much later in the fall or maybe even 2021. It tends to change every time we check. So, things are still kind of moving around and they're trying to figure it out.
Any brands that are out there listening, I think of Patagonia in particular. They are such an activist brand, and I think they do a really good job with the content. I think of Damnation, the documentary they did on tearing out dams, and I think that came out about 5 years ago. Their work is really, really solid. What would you tell a brand, a chief marketing officer, or someone that is looking to take on an issue or really support an issue, maybe that way? Can they work with a group like you, or what should they be doing to make sure that they are sharing good, accurate information?
We don't really work much in advertising and marketing per se, although, we have done our fair share of public service announcements, which is a form of marketing and advertising. And
Sure.
Of course, we all do social media and all the rest of it. And now we're all doing these Zoom things. I guess my sort of most basic advice would be just to get the information that you're going to share vetted by an expert, and maybe more than one, just to ensure that you're not misinforming somebody about something that's really important. Of course, it depends on your product and what the whole campaign is about and all of that. But I would definitely do what you can to ensure accuracy. By the way, we've worked with Patagonia on climate change issues before. So yeah, I would get that vetted as much as possible. And then, back to the storytelling thing. If you can use storytelling in your marketing, I highly recommend it beyond just 4 out of 5 dentists recommend,
Introduce me to a dentist, huh?
And there are many ways to do it, and there are many brands that do that. So I would just say definitely keep that in mind. If there's a way to incorporate storytelling and emotion, go for it.
Well, Kate, thank you for being here. How can people learn more about you and the great work you all are doing over at Hollywood Health and Society?
Yeah, you can just visit hollywoodhealthandsociety.org, and it's just all of that smushed together into one long word, .org, hollywoodhealthandsociety.org, and there's all kinds of information on the work we do, studies we've done, shows we've worked with, events we've produced. We did a series of Zoom panels since March on COVID-19 and another topic, specifically for the Writers Guild, for the entertainment industry. But they're all live on our website. And they're really interesting discussions about everything from storytelling about specifically COVID-19 to storytelling about mental health and COVID-19 or the prison system during COVID-19, and all kinds of interesting experts and also entertainment professionals talking about all of that. So there are all kinds of things you can find on our website if you're really interested, but that's the best place to go, hollywoodhealthandsociety.org.
So it would be a place for a brand, if they are interested in informing themselves about a cause, to go and search your resources and maybe find the experts there or even these live panel discussions?
You can find the live panel discussions. You can find tons of our live events that are recordings from our events. There's also tip sheets there for sort of easy access if you just need some bullet points on a wide variety of issues. And then if you need more than that, there's a contact us button that you can go to and it'll send us an email.
All right, Kate, who was your favorite character on Sesame Street?
Oh, man. I have to say Oscar the Grouch.
How come?
Yeah. I care about the disenfranchised. I felt he was the most disenfranchised of all the characters and probably the funniest. But I mean, the whole show is just charming and wonderful. And we've had the blessing of being able to work with them over the years as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kate. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. It was fun to be here, too.
And thank you all for listening to this edition of The Business of Story. If you like what you heard, please, by all means, share this episode out. And if you are thinking about doing more cause-related work in content marketing or a campaign around that, then certainly check out Kate and their work over at Hollywood Health and Society. If I can be a service to you, check me out at businessofstory.com. Of course, I've got my new book out, Brand Bewitchery. You can get print or Kindle on Amazon, and it's now available on Apple Books. And until next week, when we'll have another amazing story artist here like Kate, just for you. Remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thank you for listening.